As you can see, the title of my talk today is Enter the Kingdom of Shrimp Cheeses, Philosophical Perspectives about the End of the Internet. So, let's talk about a weird thing that popped up on Facebook about 2023, roundabout, about a picture that became a viral hit among many other AI-generated images. And this image I want to introduce you is this beauty. It is Shrimp Cheeses. You might have heard about him, you might have seen him. Yeah, there's something to say about that. So there is actually research about that more and more AI content is coming up on social media platform. And not only that there is more and more AI content, those content artifacts become more and more successful. So, as you might know already, they draw a lot of attention. They get a huge amount of likes, of shares, of reach, and so on and so forth. Even one of the most viewed images on Facebook from 2023 was clearly an AI-generated image. So not only shrimp cheeses, but also shrimp cheeses went viral on those platforms. Wow, it really has some religious impact here. So, some other beauties I brought here for you. So we have flying on a shrimp cheeses. We have shrimp cheeses, the magnificent savior. It's names I came up with. So we have, for me, a little bit too much inflated ego shrimp cheeses. And then I have a question for you. Is shrimp cheeses the prophet of an ant? And the other question is, or this brings us to the question, what does this have to do with philosophy? Is there a connection there? I would argue yes. Because I would say that shrimp cheeses is the perfect example of how cultural signs lose their connection to their cultural origin. This is something I think the example of shrimp cheeses shows perfectly. How cultural signs, how cultural representations lose their duty of social representation. When they lose their duty of social representation, they start to proliferate like cancer, they go viral, into all other cultural spheres. But they do that, and after that, they start to die off. Why? Because of the exhaustion of meaning. They become more and more meaningless because they spread into all other cultural spheres, and the boundaries are getting more and more lost. I'm talking about something you have for sure experienced also on other platforms, not only on Facebook, also on video platforms. We see more and more AI-generated content. I brought a short from YouTube that I just found. You have seen all of those funny videos coming up lately. But not only that, we also have AI-generated content in the music industry. And the music industry is as well heavily impacted by that. So AI-generated music is pushing more and more real artists out of playlists, out of different music platforms. Obviously, here is a famous example for that. I would argue that those events fall in line with something a French philosopher, Baudrillard, called simulation theory. And now we take the step to philosophy and maybe sociology. The question is, what is simulation theory? And basically, it's a progression of Marxist theory. So usually when I have my students, I ask them, what do you think about when you hear Marxism or Capital of Marx? What comes to your mind? You can scream something that comes up. What? Base? Ah, yeah. What? Karl Marxstadt, exactly, yeah. Workers, exactly. Sharing the means of production, very well, yeah. I oftentimes hear also revolution, Leninism, Stalinism, so a few new words, thank you for that. I would argue it's not revolution, it has to do with the means of production, yes, but the means of production are connected to something else, which is a theory of value, actually. So Marx's Capital shows how value transforms into different stages. It's how a form of use value, which we can see here, morphs into different stages. We see it here on a slide, it's a little bit simplified. I took it from David Harvey, who made this like perfect, beautiful graphic. I reduced it a little bit. So it's the basic notion of there is the human condition, which is the bias with Marx that humans tend, or they create out of nature objects which have a certain use value. And then through industrial production, there is the creation of commodities, there's an industrial production, then markets come up, of course there's the exploitation of labor, which you have heard, and through that there are markets emerging. And in markets there's a new form of value emerging, which is exchange value. And this exchange value then creates new forms of capital that then go back into this loop again. So, the question here, do we have a simulation here? So I would argue yes, because the original foundation, something else arose from, starts slowly to disappear, or at least to not have the impact it used to have. Here, in our example, use value disappears and exchange value becomes dominant. So, from a theoretical example, a little bit more practical, think of the financial crisis by the speculation with housing. You start off with the use value of things, in this case housing in order to live in and so on and so forth, but then you start to buy them, to sell them, and slowly this process of exchange value has replaced the original use value of an object, which then leads to funny quote-unquote outcomes, like on this picture here of ghost towns like in Spain, that we have since the financial crisis of 2008. So, now we take another term into the mix, which is sign value. We have it here. I think an awesome picture, which here's the credit to. And this sign value came up in a post-industrial era of industrial production. Because through industrial production, collective meaning of cultural signs were extracted to the most extreme. Value, and this is the important thing I will come to later, value was no longer a representation of a distinct cultural meaning. Value and meaning is now created by commodity possession and positioning your commodities in a field of other commodities of equalized industrial goods. Only the positioning of signs in relation to each other is the decisive factor for social meaning, and not the original duty of representing an original cultural and social bond. Again, let's take an example to make it more clear. This is like sociology basic that came up in the 70s. The idea of commodity and positioning of commodities in networks came up in the 70s because there was commercialism coming up. And there, I took this as an example. Oh, it's a little bit pixelated. So it is not important to, it was not important then in this thinking, it is not important to have a watch to see how late it is, but it is important to have a watch to show which group you belong to. Your and my subjectivity, who we think we are, is now created by commodity possession in a sea of other commodities. This is exactly what sign value is about. So, since we are at Republica here, in a digital world now, only sign value matters. There is almost no more representational meaning. It's a constant relocation and reordering of already existing cultural signs. I brought you an example. I took punk as an example. As you know, punk was created out of a desperate social situation, but then become a master signifier completely detached from its original duty of representing an original or social situation. After that detachment, the master signifier of punk was able to proliferate into all other spheres, which led to those examples we can see here. And suddenly we have business punk, we have investment punk, we have political punks, and so on and so forth. So, if the investment punk, this is my Austrian friend here, would have went into a punk bar in the 70s, he most likely got his ass kicked. I'm pretty sure about that. Maybe nowadays too. But very different nowadays in the so-called, or I call it, digital bar. In the digital bar, the random relocation of signs is A, easily possible, and B, even the main driver of sign value. So, we can observe here 4 stages of simulation. A, the extraction of a master signifier, unbound to social relations. B, then the complete proliferation into other spheres. C, then the exhaustion of cultural meaning, original meaning maybe. And then the death of cultural meaning by this thing coming a pure form of simulation. Yeah. So, what's my point now with AI-generated content? AI is speeding up this process. This process becomes high speed. Why? A, by a full detachment of cultural signs from their origin, which we can observe now by the data AI is using. B, a high-speed relocation and repositioning of cultural detached signs. Perfect example, my friend here, with suddenly having a shrimp Jesus. And therefore then a complete exhaustion, and maybe we can discuss about that, cultural death of the things that are in the AI mix. Because this is then the next step, pure exhaustion, proliferation, and then things start to die off. My point is here, generative AI is pure simulation. It finally cuts off the ties between digital culture and original creators that use digital culture to represent ideas, creativity, and so on. So this is the important point. It finally cuts the ties between the digital culture and its creators. And it's maybe something we all kind of feel happening right now. Cultural signs as pure simulation proliferate like cancer because the cultural boundaries have fallen in the digital sphere. We have now viral content. Viral content spreads into all other spheres, from politics to media to art, business, and so on. The boundaries have fallen. So, I would argue, right now, we are in stage 1. High-speed, full-speed proliferation of detached signs. But, as I said, the second step is always the exhaustion of cultural meaning. And I would argue this is something we already experience nowadays in maybe other forms of social life, which is represented in a certain doom-scrolling culture, in a certain dissatisfaction with culture we might experience in the digital sphere. So, my thesis is here, maybe the internet is becoming the cemetery of fully cultural exhausted objects that only proliferate from one sphere to another with no cultural representational meaning at all. I come to my conclusion now, and I brought another friend you might know, and it says the holy grail of creativity and meaning production. And now it gets more in the direction of empowerment for us as creators, as artists, as scientists, and so on. My point is, shrimp Jesus makes no cultural sense because there is no cultural human origin. But, and this is an important point, shrimp Jesus makes perfect algorithmic sense because of clickbait, attention gain, and so on and so forth. So, nowadays, not the creation out of a cultural setting defines our culture, but, and this is the important shift, a machine that creates machine-like content that works in a machine-like environment. And this is my last point for the day. I would argue, or I'm pretty sure, there is the holy grail of creativity and meaning production, as we see here. And I have the thesis that right now we're giving this holy grail out of our hands. We become spectators of a machine miracle that pretends to create meaning. But all it does is relocating signs that never create social meaning in the sense of social representation. As I said before, the depression of our times derive from the fact we believe in the relocation of science would replace a cultural collective endeavor of art and knowledge creation. But machines don't create social meanings, but they pretend to do so. And the next part to that is we are acting accordingly to it, which then has the outcome that our social and private life start to flatten out by the engagement with those, I call them, flat epistemologies. Therefore, this is my last point for today, we shall not forget the holy grail of knowledge production shall be in our hands and not in the hands of monopolistic machines, and this is something we have to keep in mind when we are using those AI-generated cultural objects. Thank you.